Hi, this is Shambhavi. Welcome to my weekly podcast about spirituality, love, death, devotion, and waking up while living in a messy world. The Satsang with Shambhavi podcast is recorded live each week with students of our nonprofit community, Jayakula. For more information and to find out about attending a satsang, visit jayakula.org. Thanks for listening. Much love to you, wherever and however you are. Today I'm going to talk about something that I've talked about a little bit before over the years, but not recently and never really very fully. This is something from the teachings of Swami Rudrananda that I received a very long time ago. And it has to do with what's called vertical change and horizontal change. And I don't know where Swami Rudrananda got it. That's Rudy. Maybe this is just part of his personal teachings, or maybe he got it from another teacher, I don't really know. It's been useful over the years, and it might be useful to you, and I thought I would talk about it today. So horizontal change in your life is characterized by some change that you make that may look better and actually be better than what you were doing before, but involves the same kind of attachment, or more attachment, or not much less attachment, the same quality of attachment. So for instance, let's say that you haven't had a spiritual teacher before, and you have a certain level of what's called codependency, or hungry-ghostiness, or stickiness in your relationships with your loved ones. And then you run into a spiritual teacher and you establish a relationship with that teacher, but it's also very hungry, ghosty, or sticky, or codependent. Of course, it's good to have a spiritual teacher regardless. If you can relate to a spiritual teacher in any way, that's very good. So it's not that it's the same, but it really is on some level a horizontal change, because you haven't yet started relating to that person in a different way from how you relate to everybody. Let's say that you're someone who has what's called a type A personality. You're really achievement-oriented and, sort of tight-knee. That would be the way to say it in our language. You're aggressive, you measure everything in yourself and other people. And then you approach your spiritual practice that same way. So you're into spiritual goals, you're into attacking your practice, you're really into having special powers and measurable accomplishments and comparing yourself to other students and stuff like that. So if you attack your practice that way, you might actually accomplish something that looks like spiritual attainment. Maybe you will have some kind of energetic capabilities that you develop through practicing like that and focusing on those kinds of things. But it really, in the terms of Rudy's teaching, that's still horizontal change, because you haven't given up your attachment to personal individual power. Horizontal change is not bad. For instance, if you become very attached to your spiritual community or very attached to your teacher, that can be a stepping stone to becoming more realized and more awake. There's nothing wrong with horizontal change. We just want to understand what it is so that we don't get stuck. For instance, if we think in our type A mode that getting spiritual powers is what it's all about, we might get those and then we might think we're done. Or we might go around bragging about ourselves. But of course, every actually accomplished teacher says, don't pay any attention to that stuff, don't hang on to it, it's not important, they'll come and go. And when you're more realized, if you have any special capabilities, you'll only use them to benefit other people, not for self-aggrandizement. Right? Anytime when we change our behavior where it looks like it's for the better, and it may actually be for the better, right? But we still have a very high degree of attachment. So, for instance, just came into my mind about 12-step programs. Very oftentimes people are trying to stop taking some kind of substance that's ruining their lives, but then they smoke a lot and eat a lot of sweets and drink a lot of coffee, right? So those things are not as harmful as maybe heroin, but they're not great, That's not where you want to end up. But if you mistake horizontal change for vertical change, then you might think, hey, donuts and cigarettes and coffee, great, I made it. Let me just stop here. In the spiritual world, of course, is what we're talking about, is trying to not mistake horizontal change where we still have a lot of attachment for something else. So vertical change is when we have some kind of transformation in our spiritual lives that actually does represent a lessening of karmic entanglement, a lessening of karmic tension, a lessening of attachment. I'm just saying the same thing in many different ways. More open-heartedness, more skill in relating to other people in a helpful way, more letting go of the self-importance and self-referentiality. Those kinds of things are vertical change. They may not be as dramatic as some forms of horizontal change. I mean, they might be, but they might not be. If I quietly experience more open-heartedness and quietly stop focusing on my own self so much as a supposed individual and start actually caring more about other people, that's vertical change, but it's not as dramatic as going like this and waving my energy into somebody. Right? I can't hang out a shingle and say, hey, I'm a little more open-hearted. Thank you.
Is that a characteristic of vertical change? It's a little more gradual and more subtle?
It depends. Sometimes it's usually more incremental, but it can be very dramatic. I mean, everyone who practices for a lifetime, doing practice every day in a sincere way, is going to have the occasional dramatic thing happen. Right. And then the rest of the time it's going to be incremental. But that quiet moment when you suddenly realize that your whole way of being in the world is just smoothed out and spread out and opened up, even if it only happens for a fleeting moment, that's a taste of vertical change. It's a taste of what could happen later on and be your new base state. But the difference really is our level of attachment to getting or not getting things for small I. Because that's basically what attachment is. Attachment to getting certain things and not getting other things. And that can happen just as well in the spiritual world as any other world. There can be just as much attachment, among people who do practice even every day. Hopefully, eventually that'll wear away. But, it's not going to wear away right at the beginning. So that's why it said it's okay to be attached to your spiritual practices, be attached to your teacher and your communities. It's even, okay if you're in some other kind of tradition where there's a lot of, we're the best, we're the greatest spiritual tradition, we have it going on, we have the truth. That's a kind of attachment. But if that's what makes it comfortable for someone to practice, it's fine to have that kind of attachment. But it's not really what Rudy called vertical change. It's just taking dogmatism and porting it over into the spiritual world. Right? But sometimes we need to do that. We can't start our practice enlightened. We have to start however we happen to be.
Seems like a lot of horizontal change, in my experience, it can be a little bit more on the mental side. When I actually feel my heart open, there's something that gets integrated, or that I'm embodying more than I was before. And, like, for example, when I first moved here and I had a very tense relationship with my mother, and going back and forth to visit her, things got a little bit easier over a couple of years, just remembering the view. But it felt like something I had to, make that effort to remember the view. It wasn't couldn't go into my heart and feel something until something happened. It was something you said once when I was just about to go see her that just kind of blew my heart open. I can't even remember what it was. And I went and had lunch with my mother, and the whole time I was looking at her, and I just couldn't even feel what I had felt before.
I mean, the tension.
Yeah. And I mean, it's come back to some degree, but so is that part of what is meant, that it's a difference between like embodied experience and more just kind of having a good understanding of the view but not really integrating it?
That's part of it, but it is really about attachment. So you felt tension in relationship to your mom for many years, but you also had a story about how she was, how you were, you were somewhat derogatory toward her. And you were invested in that. Mm-hmm. You were invested in that story. Mm-hmm. And so your attachment, it wasn't just that you had an observation about how your mom was. You had all sorts of attachments to maintaining that view of your mom. Mm-hmm. That's what we do. We get attached to stuff like that. I mean, yeah. And when the attachment goes, then more openness can happen. And you let go of the compulsion to see things a certain way.
Yeah.
So we might talk ourselves into, like in view teachings, that, well, it's better to see somebody some other way, right? We might say, well, it would be better if I could be compassionate toward my poor mom, right? Right. We're still sort of keeping her in her place, right?
Yeah.
But when we don't have a claim on our story about somebody, and when we don't need other people to be a certain way for us to be loving toward them, that's really the goal. Yeah, it's an attachment to somehow like measuring ourselves against other people. Our stories are how we measure ourselves. We have to have a response to somebody, how they are versus how we are, right? And that keeps us pretty entrapped in that horizontal plane. It's harder with parents because things go on for years where we feel unnourished or something. But what if we didn't have to have a story about somebody else? That would be a huge lifting of a burden.